The divorce papers sat on my kitchen table like a tombstone, marking the death of something I'd once thought eternal. 1 year. That's how long Emily had been gone. 365 days since she'd walked out that door with her mother, flanking her like some kind of bodyguard, leaving me with nothing but legal documents and the echo of her heels on our hardwood floor. I took another pull from my beer, the same brand I'd been drinking since I was 21, back when my hands were already calloused from construction work, and Emily said she loved how real I was. Real. That word haunted me now. What she'd meant was temporary, a phase, something to experience before moving on to what she really wanted. The memory of meeting her crashed over me uninvited, the way it did most nights. Tom's backyard cookout, July heat making everyone lazy and loose. She'd been sitting on the deck railing, sundress and sandals, laughing at something her friend had said. When Tom introduced us, she'd shaken my hand without that hesitation I'd seen in other women. That split-second pause when they noticed the dirt under my fingernails that never quite washed clean. Daniel Hayes, I'd said. Emily Morrison. Tom. Says you rebuilt his entire kitchen? She'd replied with interest. Guilty, I'd answered. She'd smiled then, really smiled. Not the polite kind, but the type that reached her eyes. I've been trying to get someone to fix my apartment's cabinets for months. The doors keep falling off, she'd continued. That's how it started. Me in her tiny apartment with my toolbox, her making coffee and asking questions about every tool, every technique. She'd seemed genuinely fascinated by the work, by the satisfaction of creating something solid with your hands. We dated for 2 years before I proposed, another year before the wedding. 10 years together total, 3 dating, 7 married. The first crack appeared maybe 2 years into our marriage, though I didn't recognize it then. Emily had started having lunch with her mother more often. Margaret Morrison had never liked me. That much was clear from our first meeting. The woman had money, not fortune. 500 money, but enough to make her feel superior to anyone who worked with their hands. She'd look at me the way you'd look at something stuck to your shoe. Your mother doesn't approve, I'd said one night after. A particularly tense dinner at their country club. Emily had been doing her makeup, getting ready for bed. She just needs time to get to know you better, she'd replied dismissively. But time made it worse, not better. Emily started noticing things she'd never cared about before. The truck I drove, suddenly too old, too loud. The clothes I wore, suddenly not nice enough for the restaurants she wanted to try. The house we'd bought together, suddenly too small, too far from her parents, too blue-collar neighborhood. The real change came when she started working at that marketing firm downtown. New friends. New expectations, new standards I couldn't meet even if I'd wanted to. She'd come home talking about her co-worker's husband who'd just made partner at his law firm, about another whose startup had been acquired, about weekend trips, to vineyards and ski lodges I couldn't afford. We could go, I'd offered once. I've been saving. It's not about the money, Daniel, she'd interrupted. But the way she'd said it told me it was exactly about the money. The distance grew measurable. She'd pull away when I reached for her after work, said my hands were too rough, started showering at night instead of mornings, kept her phone face down on the nightstand, responded to my texts with one-word answers. When I'd talk about maybe starting our own family, expanding the house, building that deck she'd once said she wanted, her eyes would glaze over like I was, speaking a foreign language. The morning I found her wedding ring on the bathroom counter, I knew. Not left in anger after a fight. We didn't fight anymore, didn't have enough connection left for that. Just abandoned there next to her face cream, forgotten like a grocery receipt. I'd picked it up, this simple band I'd saved 6 months to buy, and felt its weight. Such a small thing to carry such enormous meaning. I'd left it there, went to work, came home to find it gone. She never mentioned it, never put it back on either. That's when I understood I wasn't losing my wife. She was already gone. Her body still moved through our house, still slept in our bed, but Emily had checked out months ago. I was just the last to know. They ambushed me on a Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from a particularly brutal day of laying foundation in the August heat when I found them in my living room, Emily and her mother sitting on my couch like a tribunal preparing to pass sentence. Margaret spoke first, of course. She always did. "Daniel, we need to discuss your marriage," she announced. The way she said "your marriage" instead of Emily's marriage told me everything. This was my failure, my problem, my situation to accept. Emily sat beside her, hands folded, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Expensive. The kind of thing her mother would buy her. "Emily has been unhappy for some time," Margaret continued, her voice clinical, rehearsed. "We've discussed options, and we believe it's best for everyone if you agree to an amicable divorce." Amicable. Like we were discussing a business merger, instead of 7 years together. I looked at Emily, really looked at her. She couldn't meet my eyes, kept them fixed on a spot just past my shoulder. Her jaw was set in that way I recognized, the expression she wore when she'd made up her mind and didn't want to be talked out of it. "Emily?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You want to tell me what this is about?" I asked. She finally looked at me. And what I saw there was worse than anger or hate. It was nothing. Emptiness. Like looking at a stranger. "I made a mistake, Daniel. We both did. We're too different. We want different things," she said flatly. "Different things?" I repeated. "Like what?" I pressed. Margaret jumped in. "Like a future. Like growth. Like a life that consists of more than beer and football and whatever overtime you can pick up," she said with disdain. The insult hung in the air. Emily didn't defend me, didn't even flinch. "I see you've been coaching her," I said to Margaret, then turned back to Emily. "How long have you been planning this?" I demanded. "That's not—" Emily started. "The apartment downtown," I interrupted. "The one you said your friend needed help moving into last month. That was yours, wasn't it?" Her silence was answer enough. Margaret pulled out a folder. She'd brought props to this execution. "The papers are already drawn up. Emily's not asking for much. Just what's fair. The house will need to be sold. Assets divided. She's already moved her essentials," she stated matter-of-factly. "Essentials. Is that what we were calling it now? And if I don't sign?" I asked. "Then it gets messy," Margaret replied, her smile sharp as glass. "And expensive and public. Do you really want everyone knowing how this marriage failed? How you couldn't provide the life Emily deserves? How you held her back from her potential?" The words were carefully chosen. She'd probably practiced them in her Mercedes on the drive over. But what hurt wasn't Margaret's cruelty. I expected that. What destroyed me was Emily's complicity in it. She sat there, letting her mother paint me as some kind of failure, some limitation she needed to overcome. "Is there someone else?" I asked Emily directly. "That's not relevant," Margaret answered for her. "I wasn't asking you," I shot back. Emily shifted, uncrossed and recrossed her legs. "No, this isn't about anyone else. It's about me realizing I settled for something I shouldn't have," she said quietly. Settled. 7 years of marriage, 10 years together, and I was something she'd settled for. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, grabbed a pen from the drawer. Both women watched me, probably expecting tears, shouting, begging. Maybe that's what they'd prepared for, what they'd rehearsed responses to. But I'd learned something laying foundations all these years. When the ground shifts beneath you, you don't fight it. You adapt or you collapse. I signed every page without reading them, my signature steady and clear. "Daniel!" Emily started, surprised by my compliance. "Take what you need," I said, not looking at her. "Leave your key on the counter." Margaret stood, victory written across her face. "We'll send movers for the rest of Emily's things," she announced. "No, need. I'll box them up, leave them in the garage. She can pick them up whenever," I replied. Emily stood too, smoothing her expensive dress. For a moment, just a flash, I saw something cross her face. Uncertainty, maybe regret. But then Margaret touched her arm and the mask slipped back into place. I watched them gather their things. Margaret's designer purse, Emily's new iPhone, the folder with our marriage's death certificate. At the door, Emily paused. "Daniel, she began. "Don't," I said. "Just go." And she did. Walked out with her mother, leaving behind 7 years, a house we'd made a home, and a man she'd decided wasn't enough. I stood at the window, watched them get into Margaret's Mercedes. Emily never looked back. I spent that night packing her things. Every dress, every shoe, every book. I noticed she'd already taken the jewelry, even the necklace I'd given her for our 5th anniversary. But she'd left our photo albums, our wedding pictures, anything that proved we'd ever been happy together. Those I kept. Not out of hope, but as evidence. Proof that I hadn't imagined it all, that once upon a time, Emily Morrison had loved a construction worker named Daniel Hayes. A year can change a man in ways he never expects. I didn't become bitter or broken like everyone predicted. Instead, I became something else, complete. The house felt different now, truly mine for the first time. Every room bore my mark, not from spite, but from purpose. The kitchen, Emily complained, was too dark. I'd knocked out the wall to the dining room, installed a massive window that caught the morning sun. The bathroom, she said, was dated, restored with subway tile and fixtures I'd salvaged from a demolished hotel, each piece chosen by my eye alone. I cooked now, real meals, not just the frozen pizzas and takeout that had become routine in our final months. Turns out, when you're not walking on eggshells, afraid that your very presence is in disappointment, you can actually enjoy your own company. Saturday mornings meant farmers' market runs. Sunday afternoons were for reading on the deck. I'd finally built, the one Emily had stopped wanting years ago. Work had never been better. Without the constant anxiety of trying to be something I wasn't, I could focus on what I was good at. Took on bigger projects, complex restorations that other contractors wouldn't touch. My reputation grew. Dan Hayes, the guy who could make something beautiful from bones everyone else would condemn. "You hear about Emily Morrison?" Jim asked one afternoon at the hardware store, not knowing she'd been Emily Hayes once. I kept examining the wood samples. "No," I answered. "Dating some. Tech guy now. David something. Drives a Tesla, apparently. Lisa saw them at that new French place downtown," he continued. "Good for her," I said, and meant it. Or at least, I wanted to mean it. The talk followed me, small-town gossip that clung like sawdust. Emily had moved. Up, finally gotten what she'd always wanted. The boyfriend had money, connections, the right last name. Margaret must have been thrilled. Her daughter finally coupled with someone worthy of the Morrison name. But there were other whispers, too. Comments about how the boyfriend was particular, controlling, how Emily looked thinner, more nervous, how he'd berated a waiter for bringing the wrong wine, how she'd stopped showing up to girls' nights, stopped returning calls. I pushed it all aside. Not my problem anymore. Then came that Thursday evening in October. I'd worked late, finishing a custom bookshelf for the Andersons, and drove home as the sun dropped behind the hills. That's when I saw her, Emily, sitting on my front steps, knees drawn up like a child, designer coat wrapped tight despite the warm evening. She looked up when my truck pulled in, and I saw the last year written across her face. The exhaustion. The defeat. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I got out slowly, tool belt still on, dirt still under my fingernails. She watched me approach with eyes that couldn't quite meet mine. "Hi, Daniel," she said softly. Her voice was smaller than... "I remembered." "Emily," I replied. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted. The confession hung between us. This woman who'd walked out with such certainty, who'd signed papers declaring me insufficient, now sat on my steps with nowhere else to turn. "Your mother?" I asked. Bitter laugh. "She's not speaking to me right now. Says I'm an embarrassment to the family," she answered. "The boyfriend?" I pressed. Her face crumpled slightly before she caught herself. "Gone. With his secretary. Classic, right?" she replied bitterly. I stood there, keys in hand, processing this reversal. Part of me, the part that had spent nights imagining this moment, wanted to savor it. But looking at her, this hollow version of the woman I'd married, I just felt tired. "You look cold," I said finally, moving past her to unlock the door. "Come in." She followed me inside, and I heard her small gasp. The house she'd abandoned had transformed, become something she'd never imagined it could be. Every surface reflected care, attention, the kind of detail that only comes from love of the space itself. "You did all this?" she asked, taking in the exposed beams, the restored hardwood, the kitchen that now flowed into a living space filled with warm light. "Had some time on my hands," I replied. She stood in what had been our living room, looking lost. This wasn't the house she'd left, just like I wasn't the man she'd divorced. The geography of our past had been renovated beyond recognition. I made coffee while Emily sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd built myself from reclaimed barn wood, after she left. She looked fragile in the late evening light, expensive clothes hanging loose on her frame, fingers trembling slightly as she wrapped them around the mug I offered. "I don't know how to start," she said hesitantly. "Try the beginning," I replied. She laughed, but it came out cracked. "The beginning was David. Mom introduced us at her club. He was everything she'd always wanted for me. MBA from Wharton, family money, the right connections. He knew about wines and art and all the things I'd convinced myself mattered," she began. I sat across from her, saying nothing. At first it was perfect. The restaurants, the trips, the apartment with a view of the city. He'd buy me things I'd never even knew existed. Designer clothes, jewelry, experiences. Mom was so proud. Finally, her daughter was living the life she deserved, she continued. The way she said deserved carried such weight, such irony. But David, he expected things in return. Not just gratitude, but transformation. I had to be perfect. Look perfect, act perfect, never disagree, never have opinions that conflicted with his. When I gained 3 pounds, he put me on a diet. When I laughed too loud at a party, he said I was embarrassing him. When I mentioned missing my old friends, he said they were beneath us now, she explained, her voice growing smaller. Her hands shook harder. I resisted the instinct to reach for them. The secretary wasn't the first. There was the intern, the client in Tokyo, probably others. When I confronted him, he laughed, said I should be grateful he kept me around at all, that without him I was just another nobody with delusions of grandeur, she continued, pain evident in her voice. "And your mother?" I asked. Emily's face crumbled. "She said I should have tried harder to keep him happy, that I'd thrown away my chance at a real life. She actually used those words, real life. As if everything before, everything with you, was just pretend," she replied, tears starting. The silence stretched between us. I could see her gathering courage for what came next. "Daniel, I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake of my life. I let her convince me that what we had wasn't enough, that you weren't enough. But these past months with David showed me what not enough really looks like. You never made me feel small. You never made me feel like I had to earn your love by being someone else," she said, her voice breaking. She reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of mine. "I know I have no right to ask, but could we try again? I'm different now. I understand what matters. We could start fresh. Maybe even move somewhere new, away from all this judgment and expectation," she pleaded. I looked at her hand, so close to mine, and remembered all the times those fingers had intertwined with my own. The wedding day when she'd squeezed them during our vows. The morning she'd traced patterns on my palm while we drank coffee in bed. The night she'd pulled them away for the last time. "Emily," I said carefully, "you didn't just leave me. You sat in this room while your mother called me a failure and you agreed with her. You didn't just walk away from our marriage, you declared it a mistake, said you'd settled for something beneath you." "I was wrong," she started. "Yes, you were. But not in the way you think. You weren't wrong about us being different. We are. I'm the same man I was when you met me, a contractor who works with his hands, drives an old truck, drinks beer, and finds satisfaction in building something solid at the end of each day." "That's never going to change," I replied firmly. She was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "You want to come back because David turned out to be cruel and your mother turned out to be wrong. But what happens when you meet another David? Someone with money who isn't cruel? What happens when your mother forgives you and starts pushing again? What happens when you remember all the reasons you decided I wasn't enough the first time?" I asked. "That won't happen," she protested. "It will," I said, not unkindly, "because you're still looking for someone else to tell you who you are. First your mother, then David, now me again. But I can't be your safety net, Emily. I can't be the comfortable backup plan when the exciting option doesn't work out." She pulled her hand back, wrapped her arms around herself. "So that's it? You won't even consider?" she asked desperately. "I considered it every night for months after you left. I imagined you walking through that door saying you'd made a mistake. But somewhere along the way, I realized something. I wasn't just grieving the loss of you. I was grieving the loss of who I'd become trying to be enough for you. This past year, I remembered who I am when I'm not apologizing for it," I answered. I stood, walked to the window that looked out on the backyard where we'd once planned to raise children. "I loved you, Emily. God, I loved you. But you taught me something valuable when you left. Love isn't enough if it only flows one direction. Respect isn't negotiable. And someone who truly loves you doesn't make you feel like you need to be upgraded," I said, looking out at the darkness. She stood too, gathering her designer coat, her expensive purse. At the door, she turned back one last time. "I really did love you, you know. In the beginning," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "But you loved the idea of changing me more." I watched from the kitchen window as Emily's car disappeared down the street. A BMW now, probably a gift from David before he'd moved on to his secretary. The taillights vanished around the corner, and just like that, she was gone from my life for the second time. The house felt different in her wake. Not empty, but clarified. Like when you finally clean a window you'd grown used to seeing through dirt. I walked through each room, seeing them not as spaces she'd abandoned, but as territories I'd reclaimed. My books on the shelves I'd built. My grandfather's tools displayed on the wall where her abstract art had hung. My life, arranged according to my own vision. That night, I cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just steak and potatoes the way I liked them. Ate at my handmade table while reading a restoration manual I'd been meaning to get through. The quiet wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. There's a difference between solitude and isolation, and I'd finally learned it. The talk started almost immediately. Small-town telegraph working overtime. Emily had been seen crying in her car outside my house. Someone heard she'd tried to reconcile. Another person swore they saw me turn her away. The story grew in the telling, as stories do, until I was either a heartless bastard or a hero, depending on who was talking. "You did the right thing," Jim said at the hardware store, unprompted. "Woman walks out on you for money, she doesn't get to walk back when the money walks out on her." But it wasn't about being right. It wasn't even about revenge or vindication. It was about something simpler and more complex, self-respect. The quiet kind that doesn't need witnesses or approval. Margaret called once. "I didn't expect that, Mr. "Hayes," she said when I answered, her voice stripped of its usual superiority. "I understand Emily came to see you." "She did," I confirmed. A pause. "And?" she pressed. "And she left," I replied. Another pause, longer. "I suppose you're feeling quite satisfied with yourself," she said with bitter accusation. "No, Margaret. I'm not. Watching someone you loved hurt doesn't feel good, even when they hurt you first," I answered honestly. "Then why?" she began. "Because taking her back wouldn't heal either of us. It would just reset the clock until the next time she decided I wasn't enough," I explained. She hung up without saying goodbye. I never heard from her again. Winter came early that year. I spent it working on custom pieces in my workshop, finding satisfaction in shaping wood into something beautiful and functional. Started dating a woman named Sarah who worked at the lumber yard. Nothing serious, just coffee and conversation with someone who didn't need me to be anything other than what I was. The last I heard, Emily had moved to Chicago, starting over with a marketing job her degree had always promised. I hoped she'd find what she was looking for, or better yet, figure out what that actually was. As for me, I kept building. Houses, furniture, a life constructed on foundation I'd laid myself. Every morning, I woke up in a bed I'd made, in a house I'd restored to a life I'd chosen. The coffee tasted better, the sun felt warmer, the work satisfied deeper. Because here's what I learned. When someone walks out of your life declaring you're not enough, you have two choices. You can spend your energy trying to prove them wrong, or you can spend it proving yourself right. I chose the latter, built something solid on the ground where my marriage had collapsed. The house stands stronger now than it ever did when Emily lived here. The foundation, tested by the weight of betrayal and abandonment, held firm. And in the evenings, when I turn off my porch light and lock my door, I do so knowing that everything inside, every board, every nail, every carefully chosen detail, reflects the man I chose to become when given the chance to rebuild. That's the thing about construction work. It teaches you that sometimes, when something's broken beyond repair, the best thing you can do is clear the ground and start over. Build it right this time. Build it to last. Build it for yourself. The porch light stays off now. I'm not waiting for anyone to come home. I'm already here. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.